Growing up as a Viet Kinh person, which is the ethnic majority in Vietnam, I was formally educated at public schools that Vietnam has 54 Dân tộc anh em. Dân tộc means ethnicities, and anh em means siblings. So it literally translates to 54 sibling ethnicities. In addition to that, there's this folk saying, anh em như thể chân tay, which means siblings are like limbs, and limbs are supposed to support each other all the time. The legs must love the arms, and the arms must love the legs. This makes me think that, the relationship between ethnicities in Vietnam must be the same. We must be like the arms and the legs. The Viet Kinh must love other ethnicities, and other ethnicities must love the Viet Kinh. Thought bubble. This way of thinking about ethnicities is a bit similar to the notion of the social organism by Herbert Spencer, which basically states that society is like a living organism, naturalizing the close-knit relationship between different individuals and groups within it. End of thought bubble. As I was a little kid, I didn't know 54 Dân tộc anh em was an invented term in the effort to form the collective perception of ethnic solidarity in Vietnam. For good reasons, I believe. I had always thought that it was the fact that the Viet Kinh loved other ethnic minorities, and the ethnic minorities loved the Viet Kinh. Until about 4 months ago, I discovered this video, posted by VTV4, one of the Vietnamese national television channels, discussing the details of an attack happened in June 11, 2023 in Đắk Lắk, done by a group called Untitled Degar, the Degar Army. That was the first time I, as an ignorant Viet Kinh person, learned about an ethnic conflict occurring within the legal territory of my nation, specifically about the existence and ethnic struggles of a group called Degar. There's this group called Degar? So, the ethnic minorities did not love the Viet Kinh all along? Or are they even ethnic minorities? If they're not ethnic minorities, who are they? I searched for the answer and found this article. This site belongs to an organization claiming to be a Degar rights activist corporation based in South Carolina, the name of which is Degar Foundation. They state that they only seek for peaceful avenue, so I will respectfully assume that this group of Degar people is not related to the group that took the violent route mentioned on VTV4. Their mission is to revive indigenous culture and reclaim their basic indigenous rights, including the rights to self-determination. To achieve these goals, they believe they need to reach out to the world and seek international assistance. This organization represents the Degar people in international arenas, such as workshops and conferences organized for the indigenous people. Okay, let's get back to our main question. Who are Degar? At the beginning of the article, the answer is clear. They are called montagnards by the French, yards by the Americans, người dân tộc by the Vietnamese, and they call themselves Degar, which means sons of the mountains. And most importantly, they are the indigenous people of the Central Highlands. I consider this Who Are Degar article to be the highlight of this organization's peaceful movements, or even their main fighting device, because this site is an easily accessed website, even in Vietnam. It's a call out for help in desperation of an indigenous people upon witnessing a downfall of their people and culture. Overall, it's like a manifesto of the Degar. The article talked about the history of the Degar people on the land of Central Highlands, claiming that they have been here for thousands of years before any Champs or Vietnamese set foot on this land. The first foreigners to reach the Central Highlands were Catholic missionaries, And the first appearance of a Vietnamese person was not until 1918 when French people started bringing them to this region as servants. Therefore, this article claims that this territory belongs to the Degar and not the Vietnamese. Here's a list of things that Degar people had to suffer from, according to the article and my interpretation. In the mid-20th century, the French snatched their lands and gave them to Bảo Đại, the last emperor of the Nguyen dynasty, which was also the final dynasty of Vietnam. During the American War, their land became the battlefield of the North and South Vietnam, causing their people to lose their lives even though the war was between the outsiders. They were constantly deceived by the French, the Americans, and the Vietnamese. The French and the North Vietnamese promised to grant them autonomy and help them build their country, but none of that was done. And the Americans sided with both the Degar and one of their enemies, South Vietnam. When South Vietnam collapsed in 1975, many Degar leaders and people were executed, accused of being traitors, while they're not Vietnamese in the first place. The idea of the Degar people are not Vietnamese are repeated and reinforced many times throughout this article. At one point, they questioned how are they considered an ethnic minority in their homeland. They were forced to assimilate against their will, and for them, it was a cultural genocide. They could not reside in their ancestral land, have freedom to hunt and farm, or learn their own language at schools. And lastly, they questioned, why do people of the world choose to protect some races and not others, confronting the world's ignorance of their existence? For more information, you guys can look at the article in the link attached below. As a Viet Kinh person, honestly, I don't know how to react. I feel sad for the Degar, but at the same time, I cannot believe them entirely. Well, mainly because of the contradiction between the perspectives of the Vietnamese and the Degar. Vietnamese national media have posted tons of news articles about how Degar rights organizations are making false accusations of Vietnam violating human rights agreements, justifying these claims with actual policies empowering ethnic minorities in Vietnam, such as the cadres in areas with indigenous people have to study indigenous languages in order to communicate with them. Maybe I'm just an ignorant Viet Kinh person, so this doesn't look like forced assimilation to me. And I'm not saying what is stated in the Who Are Degar article is entirely fabricated either. We have to take into consideration the time that this article was written, perhaps 20 years ago, and the social political situation and living quality in Vietnam then is not the same as Vietnam now. The feelings of desperation, frustration, and anger might have persisted to this day and passed down to the next generation of Degar people living in the Central Highlands, ultimately leading to the attack in Dak Lak last year. But the contradiction in perspectives is not the only problem. There's still another controversy underlying this Degar article, which is about the authenticity of this article. The article was written by an unknown author proficient in English, posted by an organization based in the US on an unknown date, and shows no signs of indigenousness other than their name, Degar. By no signs of indigenousness, I mean they don't include their language or imagery from their language. Therefore, many questions could be raised. How authentic is this article? How can this article represent the voice of the Degar people? The name of the writer of this article is missing. Could it be a white person who wrote it? In the Vietnamese national media, the Degar people have already faced accusations of being inauthentic, and manipulated by the foreign forces and diasporic remnants of reactionary groups, which completely ignores the indigenous people's wishes for independence and efforts in liberating their people, and only focuses on criminalizing them. I have no opinion on this matter, but the question about the authenticity of an indigenous message to the world, written or spoken in a Western language, has long been debated. One of the notorious cases was the case of Davi Yanomami, accused of not being qualified enough to represent Amazonian indigenous people by the anthropologist Napoleon Chagnon. Davi was the spokesperson of the Yanomami at many international conferences about environmental protection and indigenous rights. He adopted Portuguese for his speech, but also included indigenous symbolic imagery in his speech. However, Chagnon was asking the same questions as I did earlier. Is what Davi said really authentic? Could his speech have been written by a native Portuguese speaker and is not accurate to Davi's true message? To answer these questions, Chagnon concluded that Davi was inauthentic. This resulted in Chagnon facing a backlash from Davi's supporters and others. He was criticized for delegitimating the voice of the indigenous. This case was retold in an article by Laura Graham in 2002 named How Should an Indian Speak? And her take on this question is that indigenous people can deliver their messages however they find appropriate and authentic, which should not be constrained by the outsider's view. Speaking in an indigenous language or dominant language or having a translator should not be a problem as long as the speaker thinks that it's the most effective way to get their message across. From here, some might feel comfortable enough to say, okay, let's believe the Degar, but somehow I'm not convinced enough. While Graham talked about how should an Indian speak and that we should respect and understand their voices, to respect and understand does not mean to always believe in what we hear or read, especially something online and the author is unknown. However, Graham does give a hint though on how most people would be more persuaded by the speech if spoke people included more indigenousness. Graham calls this craving for indigenousness. According to Graham, there are numerous ways that a spokesperson can include their indigenousness in this speech. It could be just the greetings and closings in their indigenous language. It could be switching between a dominant language and their mother tongue. It could be including symbolic imagery like Davi did. Maybe then this article would be more persuasive. At least, it's significantly crucial for the Degar to first confirm the existence and identity in order to navigate the complex socio-political situation and find a way to speak up from an extremely disadvantaged position of being criminalized as a reactionary group and not seen as an indigenous group. So what do I do now as a Viet Kinh person after knowing all of this? Well, the content of this video is not cross-verified in real-world data, and is based entirely on internet articles. So is it real? I don't know. But it's the perspectives of someone, so it's worth considering. But at the end of the day, do I know what to do? No. So how should a Viet Kinh react to the Degar struggles? I don't know. Do you?